Here, why don't you use this one?
Very good. Thank you very much, Mark and Stephen. Thank you for the invitation, and Peter, thank you for the introduction. Um, I think I'm going to come at this in a different way, and as Mark pointed out, kind of my own experiences and the work that I've done certainly over the last 25 years. Um, I was the founder of a network of charter schools in Chicago, the UNO Charter School Network, with about 7,500 students. 98% of those students were Hispanic, and 97% of those were of Mexican descent. Vast majority of them low income, a higher percentage of English language learners as compared to the Chicago public schools. Chicago's where these schools are at. The reason we started the network is one of the reasons I think Stephen's report says is the impact on immigration. And we've been talking about immigration for about 30 years now with no real solution at hand. Um, Over that time, our communities have just exploded with immigrants, and primarily in neighborhoods like ours, where I come from, primarily Hispanic. And if you think of Hispanic, across the country, 64% of the Hispanic community is of Mexican descent. The second largest group is Puerto Rican at 4.5%. So that kind of gives you a big number of a group coming from one part, not even a region, from one country. Descendants of folks, certainly like my parents as well. Um, in that time, in the last 30 years, we've seen explosive overcrowding in the public schools. Most of my adult life has been in trying to alleviate school overcrowding because this community just continues to grow. And that has real repercussions on a school district, real repercussions on budgets and so forth, and delivery of a good education. So about 20 years ago, actually 20 years ago now, we decided to open up our first charter school, and then in 2005 open up our second. Eventually, opened up 16 schools across the city, and even with 16 schools in key Hispanic neighborhoods, that was barely a dent on the overcrowding. So that makes it very real. Um, but I think what we were trying to do two things: alleviate overcrowding on the one hand, and then second is prove what's doable. And and what was mentioned a little while ago about trying to get that group of folks to the top percentage in terms of performance, I think we saw that as our challenge. What do we have to do to showcase what's possible with a community like this, and certainly with students like ours? Um, and there isn't a magic bullet, but I think for the most part, is looking at this community as a community that has great potential, and I don't want to look at it in terms of the just the idealistic view, but certainly understanding that this is a community that comes here looking to get ahead. It's not a community that's looking for the handout, although I think there's plenty of evidence in terms of showing where we do take advantage of the handouts that are offered as well. Um, we, given the population that we were serving, we decided to go completely the opposite way of what the Chicago Public Schools was doing. Um, High percentage of English language learners, yet we chose to do an English immersion model. Now that flies against kind of political correctness. It flies against what some research would say is best practices and so forth. Yet our children were learning English at a much rapid pace than the neighboring public schools. Our test scores were surpassing those of the Chicago public schools as well, which allowed us to continue to grow and open up more schools. High percentage of kids going on to college and so forth. Not to discount the challenges in neighborhoods. And we have overcrowding in our neighborhoods. We have gang problems in our neighborhoods and so forth. Um, And I think in some way it's a microcosm for the country in terms of what we have to do. I think back to Mark's book from a few years ago and the opening line of his introduction, that it's not the immigrants, that it's us. And I think that's the challenge that we have. Do we have...
Intervene, Juan. I'm delighted somebody read the book. Thanks.
It's I think that's the challenge that we have. It's not. I don't believe that the problem are the immigrants, although there are challenges there. It's, are the institutions prepared, or is there a will to want to challenge this community? On the assimilation part, I think we saw our schools as that vehicle, as the mediating institution to help immigrant families, immigrant children, to assimilate into a broader American society. We saw our schools as, again, the irony is that we would be known as having a Hispanic schools, yet we would always say, well, actually, we have American schools, right? And it's, how do we help to Americanize our children? And some of those words are harsh words, right, in terms of how they're perceived by a lot of other folks, certainly a lot of the activist folks on the left of center politically. But those are words that we would use. It's the Americanization of our community. It's the assimilation of our community. And just being very honest about what we're trying to do for the benefit of that community and for the broader society. Integration, softer words, but it's also part of that, right? The integration of this community into the broader society. And maybe a place like Chicago, that's known for its different ethnic groups. It's the place that has the largest Polish community outside of Warsaw. It's the place where we're all, just a few weeks ago, we were all Irish on St. Patrick's Day. We dyed the river green and so forth. And as I always used to joke, the next great American holiday will be Cinco de Mayo, thanks to the branding of Corona beer. And so those become kind of our reality in terms of what does America look like at the end of the day. But to me, the assimilation of a community comes at the point where immigrants feel they have a vested interest or a stake in the success of this country. And that we saw as our point in terms of the schools that we were running, where we see our kids with a future, where they see themselves with a future in this country, in the success of this country. That seems to be absent in the institutions that we have across the country. And unless we have that, then we have a bigger dilemma. And not all the kids across the country are going to graduate from college or become lawyers and doctors. We will have other problems, and are we equipped to handle that? I think that the challenge, I think the challenge of assimilation has less to do with the students or the families. I think it's more of a political problem that we have, and our willingness to face up to that question of what is assimilation, what is Americanization, what does it look like, and we kind of dance around it, right? I think our community, if you think of the undocumented community, I think it's a very pragmatic community. These are folks that come here, they want to work, they want to get ahead. I don't know that these are folks that want to stay, okay? But these are folks that, for the most part, end up staying. And that's the challenge that we have. I can tell you from my own experience that's my parents' story. They came here in 1952, newlyweds, thinking they were going to be here for 3-4 years and someday go back. Well, guess what? 3-4 years became 40, 50 years. We were all born here. And at some point, we make the best of this, right? And I think it's a recognition of that and challenging folks to see what their future is going to be. Citizenship is an important part of this, right? In terms of how are we challenging our folks to become citizens when they're eligible. But not because they ought to do this, and certainly in the age of Trump, because of to protect your rights or protect your family and all that, but more in the aspirational sense of what does American citizenship means. Back in the 1990s, we were part of a big movement to help folks. Most of the folks that came from the IRCA days that became U.S. residents, we knew that 3 to 5 years, those folks, large group of folks, would be eligible to become American citizens. But our campaign to help folks to become citizens was not a scare tactic. It was more aspirational. Of what does it mean? You're here. This is your country. You have to make an investment. Citizens, get them to vote, but yes, but also in terms of home ownership, investment in their communities and the development of communities. There is the opposite side of communities that don't have the influx of immigrants, like Chicago, and Chicago has benefited greatly from the influx of immigrants, specifically Mexican, but also Polish and others as well. Chicago would be a very small city today if it weren't for the immigrant population. There are benefits. The neighborhood where I live in, the little village community, has a thriving business strip. It's the second largest tax revenue generating strip in Chicago, second, far second, albeit, to Michigan Avenue. But it shows that there's the sense of entrepreneurial there in those neighborhoods. There, I think part of the challenge is not only looking at the positives, but owning up to some of the negative effects of immigration. And I'd mentioned those earlier. Same neighborhood where I live in, great business strip, great families, but we have our big gang problems, right? We see the graffiti on the walls. We hear the gunshots at night. Those are very real for families, so we can't ignore that, and we have to own up to those as well. I'm an optimist. I tend to see things in a positive way, where the immigration has been good for this country. Although in terms of looking at it in two ways, in terms of the folks that are here already, we have to figure out what we're going to do. I don't think there's going to be mass deportation. I don't think there ought to be mass deportation either. But we have to look forward also, is where do we go from here? And I would be one to say that our community is very pragmatic. It's a community that would say, if as we move forward, there's any attempt to do kind of some type of legalization, I think this is a community that would be very willing to accept greater enforcement at the border, greater enforcement in the workplace, as a trade-off. It's not a community that's closed off. Now, I say that in terms of the community versus the activist community. Those are two different things. And that's where the politics come in. But as a people, I think this is a very pragmatic community. I think that it understands the problems of immigration, but also it sees the positiveness there and the willingness to do the trade-off, one for the other.